Hi everyone, my name is Bianca, and welcome to Eres Tea Talks, where we spill the tea on taboo topics affecting our community. With me today are three amazing individuals that are going to help me have this extremely important conversation. First, we have Brianna Johnson, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist. To my left, we have Jennifer Mullen, who is a therapist and founder of Decolonizing Therapy. And last but not least, we have Cleopatra Dulé, who is an Afro-Taino two-spirit advocate and educator and co-founder of Abuela Taught Me. Welcome. Such an important conversation, right? One in which we don't really have in our community. It's kind of super taboo. Everyone wants to hide it in the closet, and it's just like this thing. So what do you all think is changing, right? Because we're starting to see, especially, I guess, the 18 to like 40 range beginning to really talk about this. And pushing forward, whether it's on social media or heavily on social media. So what do we think, or what do y'all think is kind of like the change in tide?
I think there's definitely a resurgence of the conversation around colonialism and indigenous knowledges. There's this new age spirituality thing, I think, happening all over the world, not just for our community. And I think it's an opportunity for us to kind of go back and reclaim sacred knowledges and psychologies and philosophies that we've always had, especially in these times where racism, homophobia, sexism, right, all these conversations are just here. Mm-hmm. So I think people are looking to heal, people are looking for new ways of doing it, people are not looking to be silenced anymore. So, and of course, Black women, Black individuals are at the forefront of that. So that's...
I can see that there's a large change in the fact that people are really acknowledging mental health as an actual thing. So I remember my mom would like feel anxious and be anxious, and then I'll be like, Mom, it looks like you're feeling anxiety. And then she'd be like, I'm not, what are you talking about? Why do you always use those words? And I'm just like, because that's what it is. Right. So it's really important that like throughout, over time, we've come up with like all these new names for all these things that have always existed. So what I see as like the big change is just acknowledgement. And that is really opening doors for a lot of different people to seek all sorts of different treatments, including indigenous treatments and treatments that aren't always Western and traditional and super medicalized in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would also say that like, whiteness is really getting like looked at. I think that for a lot of people, Trump being in office has like created this shift, but I think it's bigger than Trump. I mean, I think a lot of us know that it has been around. I like to call it caucasity, this like narcissistic caucasity of just sort of assuming that white is right. So I think that...
For a long time it was colorblind racism.
Right.
People don't realize literally that's because individuals were afraid to show their racism or their phobias, and then it became okay again. To be like, hey.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I just think that like folks of color, people in the margins, queer identified folks, disabled folks, like everybody is starting to say like, hey, wait a minute, we have a voice too. And I think things that have been around, y'all were saying, like ancestrally very long time, we're starting to like re-own and kind of take the shit all back. Mm-hmm. So...
Yeah. I think I'd add the conversation on trauma has expanded so much, right? We used to talk about it in terms of PTSD and veterans, and now we're like, okay, wait a minute. Trauma is more than just being in war, and are we in a constant state of war, even though it's not, it doesn't look like a battlefield, but arguably we're on different kinds of battlefields all the time. So we've really I think you guys did intergenerational trauma last time. Historical trauma is a huge topic, and now we're just talking about what's it like. It might be traumatic just being an American right now, living in these times. So I think that's a big part of it too.
acknowledge that there's a whole history in this country that is traumatic, therefore we inherit that trauma, right? Like intergenerational trauma, like you were talking about, that really sets a change and a precedent in how we even acknowledge and see trauma and mental health.
I would like us to define the difference between mental health and mental illness. I feel oftentimes that they become interchangeable, and people don't realize that they are different. Mental illness is a part of mental health, but mental health is not necessarily a part of mental illness in this like the square and the rectangle, right? A rectangle is a square, but a square is not a rectangle. So, I think it'd be really important for us to define that in, simplest of terms for, individuals to kind of be like, okay, that makes sense, and carry it with them.
Yeah, like for me, like coming up, I was out west in Cali and I went to school for clinical psychology, right? So like my thought was, okay, I'm gonna go out there and help people. And I was working on units, all these very traumatized youth. And all I kept seeing, right, and it was always in the inner city. And I just kept thinking to myself, like, why are they all like diagnosed with like acting out behavioral disorders, right? Why is it like conduct disorder, oppositional defiance, like all these brown and black kids having all these major psychiatric disorders? And so I feel like speaking and calling out my work, psychology is, implicit in this arrangement. Like, right, they're part of the supremacy and the shit that goes down. So that is mental illness, right? Like the pathologizing and the over like making like this kid is sick. But on the other end, I think that like mental health is about the collective, like wellness. It's about like saying, okay, how can we help this person kind of ground and be better? How can we connect them with other people? How do we connect them with resources? How do I send them to abuelas? How do I send them here? How do I send them to my sisters? Like, rather than just right away pathologizing and not downing medication, but immediately using medication as first line of defense.
Yeah, I would agree and pick up on the word wellness, right? So like you go to the doctor for a checkup once a year, right? Mental health is really just mental wellness. And mental illness is like the farther part of the spectrum where I think you've gone too long without checking in with what's going on for you emotionally, spiritually, community-wise. And then it gets to a point where, you're kind of out of control and overwhelmed and all consumed. The other piece I would add to that is the environmental piece, the systems piece. So if you're in an environment that's incredibly oppressive, and you're not getting the care that you need and you don't have resources, that can lead to what we're calling mental illness. That can lead to what we're calling a diagnosis, and that's where medication can kind of come in. Mental health is what I hope everyone does before it has to get to that point. But there are some of us, we're just not in that kind of circumstance where our basic livelihood is secure and grounded enough.
And it speaks to accessibility, right? When we look at brown, black, and indigenous communities, where does accessibility fall into? Even traditions are being co-opted by Cassidy, and financially being inaccessible, or, just feeling like you can't connect with certain things, and then you have the institution. As someone who's been institutionalized, it's a lot. I saw it all, and it was that experience in and of itself, one, made me realize like accessibility is not a thing for Black, brown, and indigenous persons. And two, it's traumatizing. Like you're going into a place to get healing and you're re-traumatized in a different way. And so it's like, how do you not associate, right, mental health as mental illness? But then at the same time, how do you find a way to check in with yourself and be able to get or be a part of the things that would allow you to find some kind of wellness amidst it all?
In my opinion, sometimes people put all the folks who need extra support as like mentally ill. And in my opinion, I wouldn't really use mentally ill much at all. I would just want to name what it is that they're going through, right? So a lot of times people use mental illness as like this big umbrella term, and I don't really think that's always useful when at the end of the day we're really just talking about a person's wellness tailored to that person. So that's why I mostly would focus on mental health and mental wellness, even though everybody would have different things. If you name it, then at least they can seek the treatment that they need. And so often for people of color, we don't even have access to those treatments, and it just kind of gets blown out of proportion. But at least for me, a lot of the times for the botanica that I own, named The Abuela Taught Me, we always want to say, hey, like people of color have the right to heal by any means necessary. And so when we make sure we give people those access to resources, then we help them with that mental wellness, not necessarily like an illness that they have to treat and da-da-da. Instead, it's just focusing on like, everybody has different needs. Let's make sure you get whatever you need.
Yes. Yeah, and in my humble opinion, I'm right on with you, because I really feel like the whole illness piece is pathologizing, and that pathology comes from Eurocentric standards and paradigms, which is whiteness, right? Like, so I don't know about y'all, but like I was in school only learning white theorist, right? So I just remember thinking like, where are the other folks? And I had to like dig and ask around, and only in my dissertation, you know, on the soul wound and intergenerational trauma, only then was I like, oh, okay, Roberto Duran. Oh, okay, this one, that one, like, you know, then your mind starts exploding, undoing the exploiting. But yeah, and I just really feel like it's important. That's where the coloniality is, you know, like that's the colonization. That's it right there, is this like, it's sick, there's something wrong. No, stress, not having access, not having money, not being able to go to the doctor, not being able to have your family here from your country, that shit is gonna make you feel not fucking good. You know, so if that's the case, then how like do we see a whole person rather than just like aspects of them?
Prior to colonialism, what would we have called, would these actually mental health disorders even exist?
You know, our ancestors, our parents, my parents had something there with not necessarily trusting these systems and these arrangements, right?
And they had their own ways to heal. I think we forget that too.
Grandparents still don't trust the medical institutions and therefore wouldn't send their family members there. Why would they? They'd rather go to church.
No, we was like, you can't pray it away, but in some ways that's almost disrespectful to the idea that we had our own ways to deal with our problems prior to Western science.
If there's anything you feel that we missed or you'd like to share, please leave a comment below.